Imagine finding your dog sneaking into your neighbor's yard, stealing their shoes, and bringing them home, again and again. At first, it seems funny, maybe just a weird little habit, but what if I told you the reason behind it could break your heart? Because when we finally figured out why, we couldn't hold back the tears. Dogs do strange things sometimes. They dig holes for no reason, bark at the wind, and yes, even steal shoes. Our dog, Max, had always been playful, but when he started coming home with shoes that weren't ours, we laughed it off as one of his silly antics. But this wasn't just some harmless mischief. There was something deeper, something we didn't see, until the truth hit us in a way we never expected. Stay with me, because this is a story that will change the way you look at dogs forever. At first, it seemed like nothing. A single shoe, a dirty, old sneaker lying on our porch one morning, slightly chewed at the edges. I remember stepping outside that day, stretching, breathing in the crisp morning air, only to stop mid-step. "What the?" I muttered, staring down at the lone sneaker, sitting right by the welcome mat. I glanced around. Maybe my brother left it there. Maybe a neighbor's kid tossed it over the fence. I didn't think much of it. I kicked it aside and went back inside. But then, the next morning, there was another. Not the same shoe, a different one. This time, it was a sandal, a faded brown leather one, the kind an old man would wear. I frowned. Okay, that's weird. I called my brother. "Hey, did you leave some shoes outside?" He barely looked up from his phone. "What shoes?" I held up the sandal. "This, and a sneaker yesterday." He wrinkled his nose. "Dude, why would I leave that there?" That's when I felt it, that strange unease creeping in. I stepped outside again, scanning the yard. The gate was locked. No signs of footprints in the dirt. No knocked over trash cans, or any sign of an animal rummaging around. It didn't make sense. Then it happened again, and again. Every morning, without fail, a new shoe. Different sizes, different styles. Some men's, some women's. A worn-out flip-flop one day, a muddy work boot the next. By the end of the week, we had a pile of mismatched shoes, stacked by the front door. At first, we laughed about it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some kid in the neighborhood thought it was funny to dump old shoes on our porch. But then, we caught Max in the act. I'll never forget that moment. It was late one evening, and I was sitting on the porch, scrolling through my phone. The street was quiet, the soft hum of crickets filling the air. Max had been gone for a little while, which wasn't unusual. He loved to roam the yard, sniffing around. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow trotting up the driveway. I looked up, and there he was, Max, his tail wagging, his eyes bright, and clenched in his mouth, an old sneaker. I blinked. No way. He trotted right up to me, dropped the shoe at my feet, and looked up expectantly, like he'd just delivered the best gift in the world. I laughed. "Max, where are you getting these?" He just wagged his tail, panting happily. I picked up the shoe, inspecting it. It was dirty, worn down, like it had been outside for months, but it was intact. No bite marks, no signs of rough play. It wasn't like Max had chewed it up. He had carried it, gently, carefully. That's when I felt the first twinge of something odd. It wasn't just a random thing. It was deliberate. I stood up and looked down the street, scanning the houses, the fences, the yards. Somewhere out there, Max had found the shoe. But whose was it? And why did he feel the need to bring it home? The next morning, I decided to test something. I let Max out early, before the sun had fully risen, and instead of heading to his usual spot in the backyard, he slipped through a small gap in the fence and disappeared down the street. I followed, keeping a safe distance. I watched as he trotted confidently, like he had a destination in mind. He wasn't sniffing around aimlessly. He knew where he was going. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What was he doing? I crept behind him, staying in the shadows of the trees. Then I saw it, a small house at the end of the street, an old wooden porch, a single chair sitting out front, and in that chair, an old man. He was staring out at nothing, just sitting there, his hands folded in his lap, his face lined with something heavy. Max slowed as he approached. Then carefully, he placed a shoe at the man's feet. My breath caught in my throat. Max sat there, tail still, ears slightly lowered, watching the man, waiting. The old man blinked slowly, then looked down, his lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but no words came out. Instead, his shoulders slumped, and he reached down, picking up the shoe with trembling hands. I watched, frozen in place, as he ran his fingers over the fabric, his thumb brushing the worn-out laces. Then I saw it, his eyes, misting over, and that's when it hit me. Max wasn't just taking random shoes. He was bringing them here, to this house, to this man. I swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Excuse me, sir." I think my dog has been stealing from you. The old man lifted his head slowly, his gaze shifting to me. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice that was soft and cracked with something unspoken, he said, "No, he's been bringing them back." A chill ran down my spine. I frowned. Bringing them back? The old man let out a shaky breath, his eyes drifting to Max. These were my sons. My heart stopped. Everything around me, the rustling leaves, the distant chirp of birds, the cool morning air, suddenly felt heavy. The old man's hands clenched around the shoe. "My son," his voice broke. "Jacob." I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. Jacob, that name. I knew that name. A lump formed in my chest as realization set in. Jacob was the young man who had died months ago, the one in the car accident, the one who used to live in this house. And suddenly, everything made sense. Max hadn't been stealing random shoes. He had been looking for something, searching, bringing back the only thing left of his best friend. The air felt thick as the weight of it all settled in. Max let out a small whimper and nudged the old man's hand. The man smiled weakly, rubbing Max's head. "I think he misses Jacob just as much as I do." And just like that, I felt my own eyes burn. Max wasn't playing a game. He wasn't being mischievous. He was holding on to a memory, a piece of the boy lost, a piece of the friend who never came back. And in that moment, I realized something even deeper. Max wasn't just bringing back shoes. He was bringing back love, a connection that hadn't faded, a bond that hadn't broken. Even in death, Jacob was still here, still loved, still remembered. And Max was just trying to bring him home. Confused, we stepped forward. Max sat there, his ears slightly drooped, his tail still, as if he knew something we didn't. The old man looked at us, then at the shoe in his hands. A weak chuckle escaped his lips, but it wasn't amusement. It was the kind of laughter that carried years of sorrow behind it. "So he's the one," he murmured, his voice soft but strained. I exchanged a quick glance with my brother, feeling that strange weight in the air again. "The one?" I asked hesitantly. The old man exhaled, turning the shoe over in his hands. His fingers traced the worn-out fabric, his thumb brushing against the frayed shoelaces, as if touching something sacred. "These," his voice cracked, just for a second, before he swallowed and continued. "These were my sons." I felt the air leave my lungs. Everything around us, the rustling of the trees, the faint chirp of birds, even the distant sound of cars passing, suddenly faded into silence. I glanced at Max. He was watching the man closely, his head slightly tilted, like he was waiting for something. The old man let out another breath, this one deeper, heavier. "My son Jacob," he paused, his throat working around the name like it physically hurt to say. "He passed away a few months ago." My chest tightened. I had heard the name before. Jacob, a neighbor, someone who had lived in this house. But not just that, someone Max knew, someone Max loved. "He was in an accident," the old man continued, staring down at the shoe like it held 1,000 memories. "It was so sudden, too fast." His voice wavered. One minute he was here, and then he trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. I swallowed hard. I'm so sorry." The old man gave a weak nod, gripping the shoe tighter. "Thank you." I could hear the pain in his voice, the exhaustion of grief that time hadn't healed. But there was something else, something he hadn't said yet. And then he did. Max whined softly, inching closer, and the old man smiled, a broken, bittersweet smile. "He used to play with Max," he said, "every evening, no matter what. It didn't matter if he was tired, if he had school, if it was raining. Jacob always made time for him." I felt a lump form in my throat. Max loved it. "It was their little game," he continued. "But Jacob never used a ball." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The old man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It started when Jacob was a kid. He had this habit of taking off his shoes and tossing them for Max instead of using a tennis ball. It drove me crazy," he added with a small, nostalgic smile. "I kept telling him to use an actual dog toy, but he never listened. He always said, 'Dad, Max doesn't care what he chases. As long as we're playing together, that's all that matters.'" I felt my heart squeeze. Max wasn't just bringing back random shoes. He was bringing back Jacob's shoes, his memories, his presence, his love. The old man let out a shaky breath. When he was gone, Max didn't understand. His voice broke slightly, and he looked down at Max with an unreadable expression. For weeks, he waited by the door. Every night, at the same time, he'd sit there, ears perked, tail wagging, waiting for Jacob to come outside. But he never did. I felt my throat tighten. Max had been waiting, hoping, searching, but Jacob never came. The old man ran a hand through his graying hair. I think, at some point, he realized Jacob wasn't coming back, but he never stopped looking. I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. Max hadn't been stealing shoes. He had been retrieving them, bringing them back, trying to keep the game alive, trying to hold onto the only piece of Jacob he had left. A lump formed in my chest as I looked at Max. How long had he been doing this? How many nights had he gone out, searching, sniffing, picking up shoes that reminded him of his best friend? And how had we not noticed? Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. He thought if he just found the right shoe, the old man murmured, voice thick with emotion, Jacob would come back to play. I clenched my jaw. It was heartbreaking. A love so pure, so unwavering, so innocent, trapped in the mind of a dog who didn't understand why his best friend was gone. Max nudged the old man's hand again, and for the first time, the man let out a shaky laugh. You know, I almost thought I was losing my mind, he admitted. Looking down at Max, I'd see the shoes disappear from the yard, and I thought, maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was grief playing tricks on me, like Jacob was taking them with him. I exhaled, my heart aching. But now I know the truth, he whispered. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. Max never forgot him. The old man smiled, but it was a sad, knowing smile, and he never stopped loving him. Max let out a small, contented sigh and laid his head gently on the man's lap. The old man blinked rapidly, his fingers shaking as he ran them through Max's fur. For the first time in months, I saw something change in his eyes, a flicker of peace, a silent understanding. They had both lost the same person, but maybe, just maybe, they had found each other. I swallowed back the lump in my throat, because in that moment, I knew Max wasn't just bringing back shoes. He was bringing back love, a connection that hadn't faded, even after death, a bond that grief couldn't break. And in the end, maybe that was enough. For a moment, none of us spoke. The world seemed to still. The wind barely whispered through the trees. The sun had started dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with soft streaks of pink and orange. And in the fading light, Max sat motionless, his gaze locked onto the old man, his body tense with something unsaid, something unfinished. Then slowly, carefully he moved. It wasn't rushed, wasn't playful, wasn't the eager trot of a dog chasing after his owner. It was deliberate, a step forward, then another, and then, without hesitation, Max pressed his head gently against the old man's knee and let out a deep, trembling sigh. The sound broke something inside me. It wasn't just a sigh. It was the release of everything he had carried. The months of waiting, the confusion, the loneliness, the silent grief of a creature who didn't have words to express what he had lost. The old man inhaled sharply, his hand shaking slightly as he reached out. Fingertips brushed through Max's fur, hesitant at first, testing, remembering. Then, the hesitation melted away, and his fingers sank into the thick fur, stroking gently, like it was something fragile. Max didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes closing, his breathing slowing. And then, something I hadn't seen in months. His tail, not the frantic, excited wag of a dog greeting his owner at the door, not the energetic back and forth of a puppy eager for a game. Just a slow, steady thump against the wooden porch, like the soft echo of a heartbeat, like a memory settling into place. The old man let out a shaky breath, his fingers tightening in Max's fur. I think, he swallowed hard, I think he missed Jacob just as much as I did. His voice cracked on the last word, and he looked away quickly, blinking hard against the tears that threatened to spill. I felt my own chest tighten, because it wasn't just about missing someone, it was about looking for them. Max had spent months searching for Jacob in the only way he knew how, retrieving pieces of him, clinging to the scent, the familiarity, the last traces of his presence. And now, standing here, he had found something else. Not Jacob, but someone who felt the same loss, someone who understood. I watched as Max nudged closer, pressing his full weight against the old man's leg, seeking warmth, seeking comfort. And the old man, who had spent so many evenings alone on this porch, staring into the empty space beside him, curled his fingers tighter into Max's fur, as if holding onto something solid for the first time in a long time. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees, carrying the scent of autumn in the air. The street was quiet. The world had shifted, just slightly. But in this moment, something felt whole again. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the emotion building inside me. Max, my voice was hoarse. I think he finally found his way home. The old man gave a weak, watery chuckle. Maybe we both did. His fingers ran down Max's back, slow and steady, as if memorizing every inch of him. He used to do this with Jacob, he murmured. He'd sit just like this, head on his lap, tail barely moving. It was their thing. Max sighed again, nuzzling closer. My throat felt tight. The old man looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine. "Do you mind if he stays a while?" I nodded quickly, the words catching in my throat. "Of course." He nodded too, then looked back down at Max, his lips pressing into a thin line as he exhaled. I haven't felt this in a long time. I knew what he meant. That warmth, that comfort, that silent presence that doesn't demand anything, doesn't ask for explanations, just is, just like Jacob used to be. And suddenly, I realized something. Max hadn't just been looking for Jacob. He had been looking for a place to grieve, for someone to grieve with, because grief is a heavy thing to carry alone. The old man wiped at his eyes quickly, as if embarrassed by the emotion brimming there. But there was no shame in it, just love, just loss, just the raw, aching truth of what it means to miss someone so much that even the smallest reminders, the scent of a shoe, the feel of an old fabric, the sound of an approaching set of footsteps, could bring him back for just a moment. And in that moment, Max had found what he was looking for. Not Jacob, but someone who needed him just as much. The last light of the day faded behind the trees, and for the first time in months, Max didn't look like he was waiting anymore. He looked like he had finally been found. That day changed everything. We had started the morning believing Max was just up to mischief, stealing shoes for reasons we couldn't understand. But by sunset, we had uncovered something deeper, something raw and unspoken. Max hadn't been taking. He had been searching for a piece of Jacob, for the love he'd lost, for someone who understood the grief he had been carrying alone. And in finding the old man, he had finally found it. That night, as we walked home, Max stayed close to my side, his usual excitement replaced by something gentler, a quiet contentment, as if, for the first time in months, he wasn't lost anymore, and maybe neither were we. The next morning, when I woke up, I half expected to find another shoe on our doorstep, but there was nothing. No sneakers, no sandals, no worn-out running shoes placed neatly outside our door. Max was curled up by the window, staring outside, his tail wagging just slightly. I didn't need to guess where he wanted to go, so that afternoon, we made a decision. Max wasn't just our dog, he was Jacob's dog too, and maybe that meant his home wasn't just with us. It was also with the old man who had lost just as much as he had. So every evening, just before sunset, we started walking him down the street, to the little house, with the porch where an old man sat alone, watching the world pass by. Only now, he wasn't alone. Max would trot up the steps, settle at his feet, and press his head against the old man's leg, just like he used to do with Jacob. And every time, the old man would smile, ruffle Max's fur, and whisper, "Good boy." I watched them from a distance, letting them have their moment. Some nights, the old man would talk, not to us, not even really to Max, but to the memory of his son, telling stories, recalling little things Jacob used to do, the way he laughed, the way he always forgot to tie his shoelaces, the way he never walked, always ran, like he was afraid life would move on without him. Some nights, he would just sit in silence, his fingers brushing absently over the fabric of an old shoe Max had retrieved, as if holding onto something fragile, and Max would stay by his side, never leaving, never restless, just there. And in those quiet evenings, something changed. Not the grief, that never truly leaves, but the loneliness, because now they had each other. One man, one dog, bound together by loss, bound together by love. And the more time they spent together, the more we realized something else. Max wasn't just helping the old man was helping Max too. The restless pacing at night stopped, the whimpers in his sleep faded. He no longer searched for shoes, no longer sniffed around the neighborhood like he was looking for something missing, because he had found it, or rather, he had found him, the one person who understood. One evening, as we walked Max over, the old man met us at the gate before we even reached the porch. He had a small, hesitant smile on his face, but his eyes held something deep, something I hadn't seen in them before. "Peace. I've been thinking," he said, glancing down at Max, who was already wagging his tail expectantly. "If it's all right with you, I'd like to keep him overnight sometimes." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I hadn't expected it. He must have seen the surprise in my expression, because he let out a small, soft laugh. It's been a long time since this house hasn't felt so empty." I looked at Max, at the way his eyes sparkled with familiarity as he nudged against the old man's leg, at the way his body relaxed, completely at home on that porch, at the way he belonged here. And I knew what the right thing was. I nodded. "I think he'd like that." The old man let out a breath he must have been holding and bent down, rubbing behind Max's ears. "Well, buddy," he murmured, "looks like you're spending the night." Max's tail wagged faster, and in that moment, there wasn't an ounce of hesitation in his body, because this was right. This was home. For the first time in months, we left Max behind that evening, and as we walked away, I turned back one last time. Max was curled up by the old man's feet, his head resting against the worn fabric of an old running shoe. The old man leaned back in his chair, one hand absently stroking Max's fur, his face soft, his body no longer weighed down by solitude. And in that simple, quiet moment, I realized something. Sometimes, grief doesn't look the way we expect. Sometimes, it's not just tears or silence or long nights spent staring at old photographs. Sometimes, it's a dog bringing back an old shoe, hoping for one more game of fetch. Sometimes, it's the weight of a head resting against your leg, the silent, steady heartbeat of something that still remembers, still loves. Sometimes, it's a wagging tail reminding you that love doesn't truly leave. It just finds a new way to stay. And Max wasn't stealing shoes. He was holding on to love. And in the end, that love brought two hearts, one human, one canine, back together. Maybe that's what Jacob would have wanted. Maybe, in some small way, he had been leading Max home all along. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life animal stories. See you in the next one.